Oh, yeah, we are back, everybody. Welcome into Speaking Steagles, the premier Pennsylvania pro football podcast. I am Nick Vete. He is Ricardo Martinez-Paz. And, man, it is good to be talking Steelers and Eagles again. We haven't had an episode since we reacted to the draft. It's been a little bit, but life has taken each of us in some different directions in recent months. Ricardo, dude, I think the last time we did this episode, last time we did an episode, I was in the United States. I mean, granted, I'm back here now, but I wasn't in the United States for a while.
Yeah.
We were both at college, and bro, I mean, like, now look at us here. We're in August. I mean, actually, now that I think about this, this is like the 1 year. This is about the 1 year anniversary of when we started up this podcast, dude. So, I mean, I guess we'll do like a little happy 1 year anniversary, man.
Yeah, man. That's like, actually, I didn't even think about it like that. That's so crazy, though. It's been
I didn't think of it either. I didn't think of it
Yeah.
either, man. Yeah, I didn't think of it either. And I mean, who knows? Now we both got different stuff going on in life. I'm going back for one more year of school after spending some time traveling, everything. Ricardo, bro, snaps for you, dude. Working it up at MLB Network. Let's
Thank
go,
you, sir.
dude.
Thank
How
you.
you liking it so far?
Oh, dude, it's been great, man. I mean, you got to talk a little bit about your experience, abroad.
Yeah, man. I mean, spent a couple weeks in Ireland, spent a couple weeks in Vietnam, and a week in London. So, never really traveled before and got to see three pretty cool countries. So definitely have a little bit of the travel bug, but happy to be back in the U.S. and happy the NFL is right around the corner. Happy my friends are doing well like you do, getting these awesome jobs. So hell yeah, man.
That'll be you next year, man. All right.
Yeah, next year. Yeah, one more year of school, and I don't know. Let's not think too far in the future. Give me the next 5 months, and then I'll start worrying about the job search. But yeah. It's good times all around for this duo, man. And I mean, honestly, good times all around in the NFL too. The start of training camp. I mean, we're finally getting out of that like dead portion of the NFL season, and I mean now we're back on this podcast because the Eagles are opening up camp in a few days. The Steelers are opening up camp in a few days, and it'll be off to the races from there as the season usually goes.
Oh man, yeah, like that like I mean players are coming back now. It's that time, coming back for vacation, or they're like 6 week break from like mini camp, OTAs, all that stuff. So yeah, no, it's good because I mean I feel like I've been reading so many articles, like so many stories, just dying at this point. I'm like dying for like some action. I need something. Like free agency's been. I mean, free agency was a big part of the offseason and the draft as well, but it's just that those like 4 to 6 weeks in between. It's just like, man, it's like dead.
Yeah, and back, once when all your favorite like reporters and like writers like go on vacation for like that week or two at like the start of summer, you're like, all right, we're really in like the dead portion of the NFL calendar. And now they're all coming back and starting to talk about training camp, and now it's getting right back into the thick of things. And I feel like we've been talking for like maybe 2 or 3 weeks about like when we're gonna like kickstart back up with like these episodes and everything. And like I feel like now is the perfect time because all of a sudden like Alex Highsmith re-signing with the Steelers to a long-term extension. So it's like the perfect little piece of hard news to jump right back into. Yeah. So him and the Steelers come to an agreement. Obviously, he was set to be a free agent, but before training camp opens up, they come to a new 4-year in Pittsburgh for the foreseeable future, at least the next 3 to 4 years. And I'm happy they got a deal done because it was kind of like the question of, well, is he going to kind of hold out a little bit? Not necessarily a hold out, but kind of like a hold in, still be at camp, but not be there. But ultimately they get it done, and he's going to be making an average annual salary of $17 million. So the guy had a breakout season last year, and the Steelers reward him with a contract.
Yeah, I was reading something yesterday up on this extension. I think it was on ESPN where I don't think, he was ever going to hold out. I mean, he just loves this team. Like, his commitment to it, I read some comment in that story. It was like he loves Pittsburgh, so he was like he really just wanted to be with the team in general. And even if he didn't get this extension, he still I think was going to show up. But I mean, he got paid now, so more incentive to show up now. But like still, it's definitely deserved after what what was it, 12 and a half sacks, 14 and a half
I
sacks he
think he
had
had
this
14
season.
and a half last
14 and
year.
a half and 5 forced
Yeah.
fumbles. Like that's it's quite the leap
Yeah.
from the first 2 years of having what I think also 14 and a half. I think he almost doubled it. Something like that.
Yeah. I
Oh
know
no,
I know
combined 8
two
sacks.
seasons
Combined 8 sacks.
2 seasons ago, I think he had like 6.5 sacks or something like that. So he doubled it. And the other thing I was reading an article in The Athletic, and the thing that's really promising is not only did his sack numbers go up, but like his percentage of pressures also went up drastically. It went from like being like 8% of snaps he was like putting pressure on the quarterback to like 11% of snaps he was putting pressure on the quarterback, which they compared it to TJ Watt. And TJ Watt is like also like 11.1% of the time he's putting pressure on the quarterback. So that to me what was what was really promising. And I think like the only thing I've really heard people were a little bit concerned about was it was like, well, is like that maybe like a lot of money per year for him, or like a little bit more than I think people may have initially expected. I think it makes him, I think he's up there among like edge rushers, highest paid in the NFL. But the other thing too is it's like we've seen TJ Watt outside of last year be really durable.
Mm-hmm.
And of the 14 and a half sacks last year, I think it was something like 11 of them came when TJ Watt was in the lineup. So like having TJ in here, and obviously you're hoping that he's going to just, get a fully healthy year, just because that's the version of the Steelers defense that's the best. And when TJ Watt is healthy and Cameron Hayward's healthy, and you just get a strong defensive front that's healthy for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Alex Highsmith flourishes at a premier position. So I don't mind, spending the $17 million a season, especially when only $27 million of it is guaranteed.
I mean, you think about his age too. He's only 25, so he like just entering that prime of his career too. So you would expect him to keep developing and keep getting better. So I mean, they're betting on the upside too, if you think about it that way.
100%. He's ascending. And like you touched on, it's the fact that like I saw that too, where like I think it was the same Athletic article I read, how much he talked about like he just like loving being in Pittsburgh and like it's just where he wants to be. So I mean that's what you have to love. And I mean this outside linebacker position group for the Steelers has really shaped up well, because obviously you've got TJ Watt. Now you lock up Alex Highsmith long term, and the question's always been, well, like how's the depth of the Steelers at outside linebacker? That's always been the question. They drafted Nate Herbig, who's going to be like a little bit of depth there that you hope can potentially develop into a rotational piece, and then signing Marcus Golden as well. So all of a sudden, you need pass rushers, and the best teams, they rotate their pass rushers. I mean, look no further than the Eagles, who've done that for the past 3 seasons. They've just had a never-ending amount of edge rushers, and the Steelers are starting to build that a little bit. And I'm happy that they get a guy like Alex Highsmith that, like you're saying, is just kind of entering his prime, and the Steelers lock him up with, really, really a contract that I don't have many gripes with.
Yeah, I mean, it's also just huge in general, because he's going to be a really important piece of that defense, as you've been alluding to this entire time. So it definitely helps to have more pass rushers. And I mean, yeah, CJ and Highsmith, man, those two that duo is scary on the outside.
It really is. I mean, when you just look around that defense as a whole, I mean, obviously, the importance of TJ Watt. Minkah Fitzpatrick is probably the next most important player on that defense. But I mean, outside of that, I think you could make the argument Highsmith is third between him and Cam Hayward. I mean, obviously, you need strong play. You need someone to step up and fill the shoes of Cam Sutton. And obviously, the Steelers are hoping Patrick Peterson's going to do that. But I mean, like, this Steelers defense is predicated on this defensive front putting pressure on the quarterback so that these defensive backs don't have to spend as much time in coverage. And if TJ Watt and Highsmith can stay healthy, and obviously they brought back Ogunjobi as well, don't want to overlook him. I mean, this could be a really formidable defensive front that's going to help out this secondary that's in a little bit of a transition phase after losing Cam Sutton and Tremaine Edmonds.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, build through the trenches, man. That's just that's the way to go. At least Howie Roseman, that's how he does it. But it seems like the Steelers are taking a page out of his book. But
yeah, certainly. So I'm happy he gets locked up and no worries about anything. The Steelers are going into training camp with everything kind of squared away. So good news on that front. Before we get into kind of talking about training camp and maybe some of the battles we're looking at positional wise on both teams, let's talk a little bit about something that's like related in the NFL landscape. And I feel like it kind of relates to both teams. And I texted you about this today, wanting to talk about it, but just the running back market, because there was 3 running backs, Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley, obviously in the same division as actually both those guys in the same division as the Eagles, and Josh Jacobs, all franchise tags. none of them coming to long-term deals with their organization. And it's just really like you're seeing the full-on, like the running back market has slowly deteriorated in like value over the years of just positionally how they're like viewed among the NFL landscape. And now it's at a point where it's at an all-time low.
Yeah.
And, I guess we could start with the Eagles here first and foremost. They let Miles Sanders, coming off really a career year, walk. And he got, I believe it was the highest free agent contract of any running back this offseason, and he was only getting like $6 million. But I'm just curious your thoughts on it while I look up Miles Sanders' actual deal here. But the running back market as sparse as it's ever been.
Yeah, I mean, at least on the Miles Sanders front, like I mean, we talked about this on here that I expected the Eagles to let him walk, and specifically for that reason. Like, it feels like running backs are expendable now. You can easily replace them. I mean, we've talked about this too. The primary example, Isaiah Pacheco, Damian Williams in the Super Bowl a few years ago. I mean, they weren't first round picks. They weren't like earlier round picks, So, and especially if you can find those kind of guys in the later rounds, what's the point, at least to a lot of teams now, is like, what's the point in using, those early round picks on running backs whose careers are, I mean, they kind of last shorter than other positional players, but it's certainly like I know Tony Pollard and Saquon Barkley are in the Eagles division, but still, like, a part of me is like, yeah, they do deserve the payday because they are like really good. I mean, Saquon especially, he's a huge part of what the Giants do. It's I mean, just think about defensive coordinators. They have to game plan around how you stop Saquon Barkley. And I mean, this past year, he had an amazing year, other than the first half specifically, but second half, not as much, but still it just shows you how dangerous he is. And I mean, how valuable he is to that team. It's still kind of a shame to see that they're just not getting paid anymore.
Well, I mean, here's my thing. I feel bad for these running backs that do like work hard to get to this level, and they do deserve to get paid. But at the end of the day, it's like there's more premier positions that need to get paid. You could talk about outside linebacker, edge rusher, offensive lineman, obviously the quarterback. But it's like when you look around the NFL landscape right now, of the 32 teams, if you go and look at these depth charts, the guys who are the number one running backs for these teams, of the 32 of them, only 7 of them were first-round picks. The remaining 25 were all second-round picks or later. I mean, you could make the case the best running back in the NFL right now, Austin Eckler, he was an undrafted free agent. You just brought up the Isaiah Pacheco example. It's like you can just find value in guys. They're expendable. Replacements come and go for these guys. So to lock them up long-term and give them big dollars, I mean, it just organizationally doesn't make sense to do so. And you can't blame the general managers in a salary cap sport to do that. It's just the unfortunate situation of it. So, I feel bad for these guys to a certain degree. I mean, at the same time, you can look up and down the amount of money. I mean, I brought up Miles Sanders earlier. He was the top running back contract on the market this year, got $6.3 million a season. That's nothing. Like, there's only 2 guys that are – Saquon Barkley, for example, wanted over $13 million a season. There's only like 3 guys who have that kind of money in the NFL running back market. And when you're talking about a Saquon Barkley, who's already, I believe, going into his age 26 season, he's already torn his ACL at one point of his career. Like, it just doesn't make sense to make him, a top 3 highest paid running back in the NFL. It just doesn't. I mean, so for him to be making $10 million on the franchise tag this year, I personally think it'd be foolish for him to not play on that tag and just throw away $10 million when there are really high quality running backs like Miles Sanders who aren't getting that type of money. Dalvin Cook had a monster year last year. He's not looking at getting, anything substantial. I mean, Ezekiel Elliott's still on the free agent market. Like, there's quality running backs still out there that aren't getting anywhere, near what like, no one's going to get the type of money that you're going to get at other positions. It's just the nature of it. It's unfortunate. But when there's so many guys in this league who are talented at that position that, aren't the big name guy, but can put up the same type of production to help a team win, you're just not going to pay that position. It's unfortunate, but it's just the case of the situation.
Right. I mean, the other part of it is just the evolution of the game, really. Just, it's a passing league. I mean, you think maybe like 10 years ago when Adrian Peterson, I mean, you literally run the ball like he'd run. I mean, you think of some of those runners, they just and even like before the 2000s, the 90s, like the Emmitt Smiths, all of them, like it's just not that game anymore. It's just that this game has evolved into way more spread offenses, more West Coast style, all this kind of like basically attacking from the air. So I think that's also a part of it. But I mean, yeah, you're right. General managers aren't going to be paying or aren't going to shell out this kind of money for running backs when they're expendable, and there are other positions that are definitely more valuable for the team, really. So
yeah, I mean, it comes down to, who are you going to pay? Are you going to pay the running back that is, obviously running back, there's guys that are special talents, but when you can find, a third, fourth, fifth round pick who can put up, 80 yards a game and rush for a touchdown for you, that's fine. A lot of different guys are capable of doing that. Now, certainly there are difference makers. Christian McCaffrey does a lot for an offense that other running backs can't. But are you going to pay the guy who can put up general running back production, or are you going to pay the left tackle who's got to go out and block Myles Garrett or Nick Bosa or Micah Parsons? Like, that's so much more of a valuable piece to hold on to, because there's a lot of guys that can rush behind a good offensive line in a good scheme and put up 80 yards a game and score some touchdowns. There's not a lot of guys that can block these freaks rushing the passer off the edge. So to me, that's where the big difference comes. Mm-hmm. Another piece that kind of ties into this too is Najee Harris was vocal about it. And I mean, I understand that running backs around the NFL are upset that they're not getting paid. But he even said himself, he said, quote, on Twitter, quote, "I agree with my running back brothers around the NFL. One sentence, history will show that you need running backs to win. We set the tone every game and run through walls for our team and lead in many ways. This notion that we deserve less is a joke." I mean, it's not these guys individually. It's just the position they play. It's expendable. You'd love to spend more money on them if there wasn't a salary cap. But when you got to balance contracts and everything, it's just the nature of it.
Yeah, and especially when it's like you can get running backs of different styles, not even necessarily just running through the tackles. I mean, ones with catching ability. Not all running backs are good at that. So some are like some are one dimensional, which is why they have running back by committees and stuff like that, like the Eagles sort of have. There's ways to work around that. When it comes to offensive linemen, that's a whole different story, because those are, like you said, very, very important if you want to block, those really good players, Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, and all of them. So,
well, you know what else the problem is too is, all these guys want the big contracts, but even if you get the production from the guys for a year or two of what you're giving them the money for, look at any of these recent big contracts that have been handed out and how they've played out. All guys that have made over like $15 million a season. Todd Gurley, great for a year on that big contract. Injured, career derailed, done. Le'Veon Bell holds out for an entire season, gets less money from the Jets, still over the $15 million a season, and his career was pretty much abysmal with the Jets. Even recently, Ezekiel Elliott got another big contract at the running back position. And all of a sudden, he was supposed to be signed through like 2026, 2027, something like that. And he's no longer on the Cowboys roster. So it doesn't make sense for franchise to do this. It doesn't make sense for this to be where owners dole out their money. That's not the position you're going to do it. It's unfortunate. And when was the last time we saw a team that won the Super Bowl be carried by their run game? I mean, it hasn't been any time recently. And that's you hit the nail on the head earlier, saying now everybody's going to these high octane, throw the ball down the field, West Coast spread offenses. I mean, really, since like Marshawn Lynch and the Seahawks, you haven't seen that type of offense win a Super Bowl. And they had the Legion of Boom there as well on defense, which was a huge factor. So, I don't know. I don't see it changing anytime soon. I mean, Derrick Henry and the Titans are probably the closest that it's come, but I mean, even with that, still, it's fallen short every single time that they've made a playoff run. They haven't been able to get to the promised land. Haven't even been able to make a Super Bowl with the running back leading the charge. So I don't see it changing. And it's unfortunate for the running backs, but that's just the nature of the position. And eventually we're going to start seeing, less and less. You're going to start to see, this is what's really going to be the evolution, is you're going to start to see the running back position. There's going to be less and less guys who can duplicate that 80 yards a game, 1 or 2 touchdowns a game, because less kids are going to want to play that position. You also get beat up a lot at that position. So young kids are going to start looking for the positions that are going to make a lot of money. They're going to want to play, wide receiver. They're going to want to play quarterback. They're going to want to play as a pass rusher. They're not going to want to play running back. And then when all of a sudden you do need these running backs and there's less guys who can put in the week in and week out performance, then we can start to see the market kind of rejuvenate. But I still don't think that's going to be any time in the near future here. And there's going to be a lot of running backs due for contracts here soon that just aren't going to get paid.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll ever go back to the way it was, but I don't know. That's just how evolution works, right? So
yeah, we will see if anything changes, but we will transition now. Talk a little bit about the Eagles. And Ricardo, I just want to know, like, I want to just know your raw opinions on this, because CJ Gardner-Johnson came out and talked about how one of the worst parts about playing in Philadelphia, and one of the words used was they're just effing obnoxious, among other things. So a guy that was really a lifeblood of the team a little bit last year. I mean, what's your reaction to hearing him kind of like really for no reason just going out of his way to, talk about the Eagles fans in this light?
I mean, I can understand that because, yeah, Eagles fans are like live and die with this team. It's like they feel entitled, like not me per se, but a lot of like very, very strong and Eagles fans are very opinionated. They'll
So wait, let me ask you. Do you what? Let me ask you, because I pulled up the exact quote. And I want to know. Like, I get everything you're saying, but is this a bit far? I mean, this is a guy that was playing for the team. He said, "quote My least favorite thing is the people." He said, "They're, quote, effing obnoxious. I effing can't stand those effers." I mean,
listen, the city of Philadelphia loves football. This is their sport. Like me personally, when I heard that, I was like, honestly, I didn't care very much about it. I was just like, okay, fine. Say what you want about it. Like, I don't know. I just didn't really think it was all that. Like, it didn't offend me in any way. I just thought it was something funny. I kind of scoffed at it. I was just like, it's just like, maybe he's salty about all of them, whatever. Yeah, fine. So be it. He has his own opinion. He's entitled to his own beliefs, whatever. But like, yeah, I'm not gonna like scold him for it. Like, fair enough, fine. If that's how you feel about it, so be it. But like, just remember you were in the Super Bowl with them. Just just remember, next time you come to Philly, you're gonna get booed like crazy. So that's you're just setting yourself up for it.
That was the first thing when I heard those comments. The first thing I did was I went and looked at the Eagles' schedule just to double check they don't play the Lions at all this season, and unfortunately they don't.
Yeah,
but it also kind of adds a little bit more perspective, because when that contract came out that he signed with the Lions, I remember your general reaction was like the Eagles couldn't have offered him that. Like, there's no way they could have kept him for that amount of money. But I mean, now it becomes a little more clear that maybe there was something more to it than just, the Eagles not wanting to match that number. Maybe it was more on his side of the ball.
It might have been, yeah. I mean, at this point, like, I've moved on from that. Like, it's just, whatever any former Eagles player says now, it's just like, take it with a grain of salt. It's just like, I'll think about it for a second and be like, they're not on the team, so be it. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. And hey, instead they were able to keep, both Darius Slay and James Bradbury, and the secondary still looking pretty solid. So, you know what? It could all still pan out for the Eagles here. And while we're talking about the secondary, let's just transition into training camp a little bit. And, obviously things are going to start, kicking up. And once these players get out on the field, then we really start hearing some of the storylines that are going to come out. Things are going to ramp up a bit, but I mean, let's just talk about it a little bit from, the start. What are some of our expectations? Is there anything we're keeping an eye on? Maybe any position battles to keep an eye on first. So I guess let's start with the Eagles a little bit and just talk about, like, are there any storylines you're interested in? Any broad storylines you're going to keep an eye on, so to speak? And we can get into position battles maybe in a little bit, but just like anything general you have your eye on.
Right. Okay. I mean, if we're talking generally, then I would say, so we talked about this last year too, just how like Nick Sirianni's approach of being a bit more like not as intense as some other head coaches, sort of giving players more rest days, and I'm sure he's going to stick with that sort of. I mean, it seemed to work out this past year. The injuries weren't all that significant, other than maybe Derek Barnett, who was lost for the season. Jordan Davis had an injury too, but I don't know if that's necessarily because of how light training camp was and all that, but like that's I wonder how if the approach changes, and especially with weather being just hot as hell. But yeah, I feel
Mhm.
like it just gets worse every year, each summer. But um, I mean, I'd say that's one. But in the other one, probably bigger than this one I just mentioned is, the Eagles hired or promoted their offensive or their quarterbacks coach, who's Brian Johnson, who's going to be the offensive coordinator. So that'll be interesting because he's known Jalen Hurts for what, since he was 5 years old, which is crazy to think
It
about.
is
But
nuts.
so I mean, they already have chemistry there. I'm not super worried about that. It's more on the defensive side, especially with all the turnover and all these new players coming in and players who left. But Sean Desai, who was a defensive assistant with Seattle this past year, defensive coordinator with the Bears 2 years ago. So from what I've read, he models his defensive scheme based off Vic Fangio, so who's now, I believe, with the Dolphins, almost was with the Eagles. The Eagles actually consulted him during the Super Bowl run, but yeah, so a bit more 3-4 sort of, yeah, 3-4 technique. So I don't think Hassan Reddick or any of the outside linebackers will be affected all that much. It'll probably be a more like a smoother transition than I think. But um, that'll be really interesting to see how his scheme plays out, um, and yeah, really just see that unfold. Who steps in the middle of the field? N'Kobe Dean is supposedly going to have the green dot be calling the plays. So um, and then figuring out the safeties too. That's a huge part of it, as we were talking about
Mhm.
before. Just losing Marcus Epps to the Raiders and CJ Gardner Johnson to the Lions. So figuring all that out will be quite the challenge for Sean Desai. But I feel like he'll be fine. I think they'll work it out.
I am curious with the Eagles too, and I mean, it's not something that you're really going to see through training camp because I feel like it's not something it's like there's no way to really grasp unless you're there in the building
Right.
working as a part of the team. Kind of how the offense like regroups because I don't know how much the system's going to change because obviously they hired internally and everything,
Yeah.
but I just started watching that quarterback documentary on Netflix and just seeing Kirk Cousins last year with the new system and that he had with Kevin O'Connell. And he talked about how, like, even into week 1 and week 2, again, I only watched episode 1 so far, but he talked
Mm,
about how, like, he still wasn't even fully comfortable in it, after the first 2 weeks of the season. Kind of opened my eyes a little bit. And obviously, they still had a pretty successful season, all things being considered. But, it makes you wonder, could there be any growing pains? And, there's no way that you're really going to be able to tell through training camp how quickly they're adjusting to that. But that's something that's a big just area of not concern, but area of like I can't wait to see what this offensive product looks like with a potentially new system, how different the system actually is, and how quickly the Eagles offense is able to kind of grasp it and move forward and hopefully get back to the production they had last year.
right. I mean, yeah, I actually need to watch that now that I think about it. But
I did.
yeah,
I wasn't. I was holding off on it, and then I was like, you know what? If I don't watch it like here at the start of training camp, like if I don't get to it now, I'm not going to get to it once like the
right.
season gets going, and once we get into like mid-August, and we're like counting down the days until the season. So I just started it,
Yeah.
even though I'm like halfway through Peaky Blinders. I took a break from that.
I heard he was pretty solid from a few people, so I don't know, but yeah, no, it's man, yeah, you won't really be able to tell how. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised um, if there were some little hiccups here and there at the beginning of the season. That's usually how it goes for any team. I mean, the one example I always think about when it comes to like a slow start is like the Patriots. Well, at least when Tom Brady was there, it seemed like they always would stumble. At least they would always like lose the opening game for some reason, and then that eventually they'd figure it out. But I'm not like overly concerned about it because it's not like the Eagles hired an offensive coordinator from like externally. Like he already know Brian Johnson already knows the offense, and Nick Sirianni. Don't forget he's an offensive mind too. So it's not
Yeah.
like it's gonna be totally different. Obviously, there will be more nuance, different things, different nuances, and all that. But I don't think it'll be that difficult, or at least it'll be that slow of a start.
Yeah. And we'll certainly wait and see. And you touched on it too, but I think relatively as far as injuries are concerned, the method Sirianni used last year, I mean, I think it worked pretty well when you look at, just the carnage some of these other teams around the league were dealing with. So, yeah, I expect more of the same from that. Before we get into the position battles, that we kind of are looking at, just a couple storylines. I'll do the same thing. I'll give like two big overarching storylines I have with the Steelers. The first one, and I feel like it's just pretty obvious, is just like it's almost become like overdone at this point. It's just like, can Kenny Pickett build off of last year? Because like obviously that's like the big hope. Like this team is going to go as Kenny Pickett goes. It's frankly as simple as that. And I feel like a lot of the beat writers that I read have been like, I don't want to say down, but they've been like skeptical because, it was a lot of close games last year. Towards the end of the season, they had those couple of come from behind wins. So it's like, can Kenny Pickett and Matt Canada continue to build together and grow in this offense? And that's what it's going to come down to for the Steelers to have success. And it's just scary, the proposition of it like not working out and this being the last year of Matt Canada's contract. And then all of a sudden it's Kenny Pickett's trying to develop that potentially now obviously there's been people out there. I was one of them last season that was calling for it at various points for Matt Canada to be gone. But now that he's back here for the second year, you just want there to be success between these two at this point. So the big storyline is going to be how much can Kenny Pickett continue to develop, and that's the big hope. And I think that's definitely the first storyline that anybody's going to talk about with the Steelers because it is the eggs are in the basket with him being the franchise quarterback going forward. So all eyes are going to be there first and foremost. And then not so much a position battle, but I feel like it's one of the spots where the Steelers maybe have the biggest question mark as to how they're going to go about it. And that to me is why it's a storyline. And that comes down to the inside linebacker position group. They let go of pretty much everybody that they had. Miles Jack, they released him last offseason. Devin Bush, they obviously didn't bring back. And they just went a different direction from guys who were, almost a completely different scheme change. We've talked about this in the past where they went from the guys who were more of the sideline to sideline, stick with the tight ends, stick with running backs, receiving out of the backfield, that type of thing, to now they're looking at a bunch of downhill guys and bringing in Cole Holcomb and Landon Roberts. And, obviously they're expecting Mark Robinson to potentially take up a bigger role. So I'm really curious how the scheme on defense potentially changes, what they do differently in the secondary to kind of complement those inside linebackers, what kind of different personnel they run. And ultimately, there is a little bit of a question of depth behind Cole Holcomb because I don't know if Landon Roberts is necessarily an every down linebacker. And we really haven't seen enough development out of Mark Robinson to put anything to put any stock into that option as well. So to me, that's the next, I guess, kind of the next biggest question mark that I have in training camp is just like, hey, what are we going to get out of this position group? Who's going to emerge that we maybe weren't talking about? And, is this kind of shift in scheme, in personnel going to work out? Maybe the way the Steelers are planning on infusing that into this defense.
Yeah, I feel like the Eagles and Steelers have sort of a similar kind of vibe in that, on the defensive side, at least. Linebackers also, pretty drastic changes, but no, that'll certainly be I'm surprised you didn't pick the cornerback room instead of the linebacker.
Well, see, I'm gonna get into that when I get into the position battles.
Fair enough.
I'm gonna talk about that more. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but no, that's certainly. I am curious to see if any of them will be three. I'm sure one of them will end up winning out and being that sort of 3-down linebacker, 3-4 down linebacker. So it's really interesting to see how that'll play out, though. But going back to your first point, your first storyline. We knew. I knew you were going to bring up Matt Canada. I didn't have to say. I feel like that's such an obvious thing, as you said.
Dude, anything you've read, again, this period of just like nothing going on in the NFL, anything you read Steelers related, it's like it's either talking about Kenny Pickett or it's talking about Matt Canada or it's talking about both of them together. So it's hard. You like, again, that's why I'm saying I'm almost sick of hearing it at this point. Like, let's let these guys get to training camp, but it's like that's what everything's going to hinge on for the Steelers team this season.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure. As you said, Matt Canada's last year, and then it's up. But typically when you I mean, I think it's a good thing that they kept him in the sense that usually in the second year in an offensive system, quarterbacks get more comfortable, they're more confident. I mean, you saw that with Jalen Hurts, who had, I mean, prior to last season, had a different offensive coach for like 6 years. And so, just a revolving door of offensive coordinators last year being a second year with Shane Steichen. And look where that went. I'm not saying that Kenny Pickett's going to take off like that, like Jalen Hurts, but it certainly, at least based off that logic, could help having him a second year in that system.
And I think that's a huge reason why they brought Matt Canada back. I mean, one, because they had another year under contract, and the Steelers just known, like, if they pay you to coach for this many years, they're not gonna fire you unless it's something really bad. And it's on top of that factor. It's like, do you want your potential franchise quarterback learning a whole new system in his second year? So hopefully we can see him continue to grow. But all right, with the time we have left, let's just jump into a couple and just bring up a couple position battles we're maybe looking at each of these rosters, maybe 2 or 3 position groups or battles that we're looking at. And let's start with the Eagles again. What's the first position battle you're looking at?
I mean, it has to be safety. That's just not even a question. I mean, we already said it. Marcus Epps gone, CJ Gardner-Johnson gone. Eagles brought in Sydney. They drafted Sidney Brown. They signed Justin Evans from the Saints. Terrell Edmonds from the Steelers. And that's the one you called. that one I'll always remember. But and then literally, what was it? I think it was after, literally like moments after we had recorded an episode, and it literally happened.
Gosh, dude. It was like directly we were like talking about what the Eagles were going to do at safety. And I don't remember if I brought it up or if I think I brought it up on it. I was like, maybe Terrell Edmonds would be an option. And then as we logged off, both of our phones got the Twitter notification. I remember immediately getting a text from you.
Yeah, I was like, wow, look, if we had just stayed on a little longer, it would have happened. But no, that's definitely the shakeup. I mean, Reed Blankenship is most likely going to start at free safety. Kayvon Wallace is the other one, the backup, who's kind of more of a special teamer now. He was okay. He did better than I expected as a backup safety. But that strong safety role, man, that's going to be really interesting to watch. I mean, Sidney Brown is a hard hit. I love watching his highlights. He's just like, to me, he's like Philadelphia. That's like kind of player that Philadelphia wants, a hard hitter. Almost reminds me of Brian Dawkins, but like, it's like the hard hitting aspect at least. But leadership,
I mean, that's a big comparison. But
no, but at least in that respect, because I don't remember the last time the Eagles had a hard hitting safety like Sidney Brown. I mean, I really couldn't take Malcolm Jenkins, maybe, but not really. He was more just. No, that's being generous. So I mean, Sidney Brown, I love seeing a different kind of like personality, a different kind of style, more like a nasty sort of like a very just like downhill, like I'm gonna take you down. Just like, I mean, I love that. That's sick. Like that's awesome. We haven't had that in a while, so
I think the thing I like most about this position group, and I'm with you on Sidney Brown, I like that kid a lot, is also just the fact I feel like the Eagles were like, all right, we can't really hit a home run with anything here. Let's just throw a bunch of hooks in the water and see what catches. Terrell Edmonds, Sidney Brown, Justin Evans. We still got Kayvon Wallace here, and obviously Reed Blankenship with a good season. It's like something's got to stick. You throw enough gum at the wall. One or two pieces are going to stay up there a little longer than the others. So
so that's the hope.
I like what they did.
And I mean, I guess if we're moving on to a different position, I don't really want to. Nah, we're not talking running back. That's lame. It doesn't matter. Running new faces, running back by committee. We already touched on it, but man, I'm torn because linebacker is also one that is kind of important, but defensive tackle lost Javon Hargrave, so I guess I'll go with linebacker because we did lose 2 starters in TJ Edwards, who went to the Bears, and Kazir White. I don't even know where he signed, honestly, but he's not with the Eagles anymore. So instead, the Eagles signed Nicholas Morrow, or Moreau. I don't know how you say his name, but I think it's Morrow, from the Bears. And then the Kobe Dean is set to step up. I mean, he was more of a backup last year, didn't really play all that much, more of a special teamer, but the Eagles drafted him with the intention of him being an every down linebacker. So, I mean, he's going to, as I said before, he's going to be calling the plays on defense, the green dot on the helmet. So that's, I mean, I'm not going to say that as he goes, the defense goes, but he's going to be a really, really important part, and he's going to have some big shoes to fill and really hone that position and that defensive play calling ability. Because, I mean, otherwise, I don't know who the Eagles turn to, because, I mean, kind of drafting, like I said, to be that person, to be that guy in the middle of the field. So
they're putting a lot on his shoulders right now. I mean, from what they went with last year, and again, I mean, you know, we talked at the start of this episode, 1 year anniversary. I remember, you know, early on in the days of speaking Steagles, we were both talking about how much we liked Nakobe Dean, and he really wasn't featured at all on defense last year. And now he's really getting thrust into a big role. I have high hopes for him. I mean, this guy has, you know, proven people wrong at every level. And, you know, not saying that he necessarily has to prove anyone wrong here, but, you know, I think he's going to step up to the plate, and I'm hoping he can deliver, because just, you know, hearing his story, and I remember reading about him coming out of Georgia in the draft last year, and obviously went a little bit later in the third round than people were expecting. So I'm pulling for him, and I hope he can be that guy. And yeah, he's certainly going to be an exciting one to watch through training camp for the Eagles.
Sure.
Do you want to touch on one more position battle, maybe before we move on to the Steelers?
I feel like I'm just going to keep actually, no, I'll go offense. I'll switch it. I'll go the right guard position, because I actually looked at this yesterday, and from what I understand, Tyler Steen, the rookie, I believe is the third round we drafted him, second or third round? Third round. It was third round.
Third round, yeah.
He's actually, he was put there as the starting right guard at the moment. And I was curious about that, because Cam Jurgens was the one who we drafted last year as Jason Kelsey's sort of replacement eventually. He was the one who was actually there like a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. So I'm just like, oh, that's a really interesting one. Not that I didn't expect it, but I was like, it'll be interesting to see like the first team reps and all that, like reading all the stories. That's obviously a huge position. I mean, Isaac Seumalo's now with the Steelers. Massive sign for that. I mean, I think it's great for you guys. I'm the more I thought about it as like time went on, I was like, yeah, that's actually a bigger loss than I thought it was going to be. As much as Jeff Stoutland is a great coach, it's still a really, really, I mean, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Lane Johnson, or it was Jason Kelsey, who like had really high praise from him. He's like a high football IQ player, like just really under the radar, just kind of goes about his business, and is just really a really good player that the Eagles are going to miss. So, I mean, that position is going to be really interesting. The Eagles also brought back Dennis Kelly, who they drafted in 2012, the 5th round, back in the Chip Kelly era. That was a disaster. But yeah, so that'll be interesting. He might just subtly throw that in there, but yeah, no. So Dennis Kelly, I mean, very versatile to play anywhere on the offensive line except for center. So who knows? Maybe they'll battle it out there. Tyler Steen, Dennis Kelly, maybe Cam Jurgens. Who knows? That'll be a really interesting one to watch. So that's my last one. I'd say.
Cam Jurgens, definitely another guy. I'm excited to see how he progresses.
I hope he doesn't see the field this year.
See. So, there you go.
For Jason Kelsey.
All right.
I want to
know. Yeah. Well, we will keep an eye on those position battles, and I'll give you 2 from the Steelers before we wrap things up here on today's episode. And dude, I mean, I'm going to stick with the offensive line, because that is what I'm going to have my eyes all over in this training camp. And I mean, dude, to me, it's like what the Steelers did. I mean, you know how elated I am about Broderick Jones coming in, and you just touched on it too. Isaac Seumalo coming in to play left guard, dude. I mean, I've just from the low expectations I had this time last year for the offensive line to them progressively getting better than I expected all throughout last season, to the point where they were like really sticking it to teams towards the end of the season when it came to running the football, to now with these 2 big additions. I mean, I'm just excited to see really how the battles shake out, both at the tackle spot. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if Broderick Jones doesn't start right away. And I certainly don't think Dan Jr. is just going to hand over that left tackle spot. But just when it comes to those three guys at the tackle position. And also the fact that, people, yes, you bring in Isaac Seumalo, he's going to start at left guard. James Daniels, really one of the most underrated players on the Steelers, had a good season. He's going to be your right guard. But I feel like people are just kind of overlooking the aspect of just expecting Kevin Dotson to roll over and let these guys kind of have these positions. I think it's going to create some good, competition in camp. I mean, competition breeds success. And also throwing Nate Herbig into it as well. Former Eagle, played with the Jets last year, a guy that has some starting position. And the Steelers are known, on their roster on game days to only carry, 7 to 8 offensive linemen. And you wonder, do they want a true backup center? Or are they going to try and, I don't know if Nate Herbig ever had any experience playing center. Are they going to try and maybe, give Kevin Dotson some reps there, what they're going to do for kind of that role. So I think it's really interesting. I mean, you talk about, the 5 starting offensive linemen from last year, adding Isaac Seumalo to that mix, adding Herbig to that mix, adding the rookie, Broderick Jones to that mix. All of a sudden you're at 8 guys, not even counting a true backup center, that the Steelers are really only going to roll with 7 or 8. So to see how that all kind of shakes out, I am really, that to me is what I'm most excited about. And just because how elated I am about Broderick Jones. And I've talked about it's not going to come right away, but just to see kind of his development and see the competition on the field, that's the first position group I'm most excited to see the battles in training camp.
Do you expect Broderick Jones to start week 1 at left tackle?
Dude, I want to say yes, but a lot of people have brought up a good point. I think his first 2 matchups of the season, I know one of them is against Myles Garrett. Let me double check the Steelers schedule real quick. But the 2 first weeks of the season, he would have really tough matchups. So yeah, it would be Nick Bosa in San Francisco, and then it would be Myles Garrett and the Cleveland Browns. So a lot of people are saying maybe they're going to hold off on thrusting him in right away at some point. But I mean, Pat Meyer, the offensive line coach, he's been quoted as saying, you don't draft a guy in the first round to sit him. And I've said, even when he gets a shot, whether it's to start the season, that week 1, whether he starts, week 4, whether it's halfway through the season, whatever it is, expect some growing pains with it.
Yes.
But it doesn't always come quick for offensive linemen. Andrew Thomas of the Giants struggled mightily his first season, and now he's turned into one of the best offensive tackles in the NFL. So, take some time. It'll come, but, roll with the growing pains a little bit with this kid, because I think he's got a chance to really be special. And that was the talk coming out of the draft, that he's possibly got the most upside out of any of the guys that went in the first round.
Yeah, you literally. I was thinking Andrew Thomas too. That was the prime example. Yeah, but I mean, personally, I'm obviously not a Steelers fan. I mean, by association, I kind of am. But no, I think they should throw him in. Like you said, there's gonna be growing pains. That's just inevitable.
Yeah.
That's part of it. I don't really understand the point in holding him up. And I'm not saying that they will, but I just just get him in there. You drafted him in the first round for a reason. I mean, I expect him to start week 1 because I mean, he's just, even with all the, even if he's very raw still, he's going to grow, he's going to develop. I mean, the best way to do that is to play. That's just how I see it.
Yeah. And dude, here's what I expect, honestly, from training camp. I expect he's going to work with the second team to start training camp. I expect that. I mean, remember last year with Kenny Pickett, everybody knew he was going to at least be the backup, but they had him listed as the 3rd string quarterback on the depth chart, all the way through training camp.
Right.
Even if their plan is to just throw him in there raw to start the season at left tackle, I expect him to be, second on the depth chart, working with the second team. I also feel like that's, if your logic does prove to be true, that he's going to be the starting left tackle, no matter how raw he is, then I'm interested even more to see, all right, Dan Moore, go challenge Chuks Okorafor for that right tackle spot. So, that's where I just think that there's so many fascinating angles to look at how this offensive line is going to break down, and we'll keep an eye on it. And then real quick before we wrap things up here, the other position group, and you alluded to it, it's got to be the secondary. It's got to be the cornerback position. Letting Cam Sutton go, obviously Akella Witherspoon, it didn't work out with him last year. And now you've got, Patrick Peterson, the veteran that you bring in to kind of fill the role as that number 1 cornerback. You draft Joey Porter Jr., and you've still got Levi Wallace there. And I think a lot of how successful this group is going to be, believe it or not, hinges more or less on Levi Wallace being, as good or close to as good as he was last year. I mean, he was another guy that was a little bit underrated last year. And I think if he can kind of, hold serve, so to speak, and be that, number 2 corner on the Steelers depth chart, I think it makes them that much better. And, Patrick Peterson has come out and said, like, I forget, I think he he vocally said to somebody in an interview or something, or maybe it was on his podcast with Brian McFadden. I think he said his goal is like 7 interceptions on the season, which is a bit lofty. I mean, I don't think he's done that in a couple seasons. But, I like that. It's not going to be a redshirt year for Joey Porter Jr., but I also don't think the expectation is for him to come in and be an every down outside cornerback. And the role that I think a lot of people are expecting is, on like third downs, passing downs, when you're in the nickel or in the dime and you move Patrick Peterson into the slot, Porter Jr. is going to be the guy that lines up opposite Levi Wallace. So that's why I feel like a lot of the success of this group is going to hinge on Levi Wallace, because if he's not the same player he was last year, and then all of a sudden you're really counting on, a 33-year-old Patrick Peterson, a rookie Joey Porter Jr., then things start to get really slim in that cornerback position group.
Yeah, no, that's it's so fascinating how that's going to pan out. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure I really have much to add on that, but I mean, it's going to be, like really, really interesting to see how Joey Porter Jr. I mean, some expect him to go in the first round. To see how, I mean, obviously the story is dad played the Steelers. I'm always going to touch on that. It's always like the feel good sort of thing, the feel good aspect of it, but like to see how he develops. And similar to Broderick Jones, growing pains expected. Absolutely. And I think it's reasonable. Your logic of, or expectations of him not being an every down sort of corner. I feel like that's, maybe like eventually he will get there, but I think at the start, sticking him more of like a rotational, situational kind of corner is probably what's going to happen. And Levi Wallace is going to be a huge part of that success, as you said. So,
and I think that's something, I mean, I don't know if we're going to see it a lot in training camp per se, or how to even evaluate it, but I think we could see, because of kind of, there's not a lot of depth behind those 3 guys. I mean, it comes down to James Pierre, who's never caught on, and, Corey Trice Jr., who was, a guy that was a 7th round pick this year. So I could really see, with that lack of depth and Joey Porter Jr. being young, and you've got an aging Patrick Peterson, and, obviously we've talked about the turnover at the inside linebacker group. I could really see them utilizing the 3 safety, kind of personnel look, with Keanu Neal coming in and obviously DeMonte Casey re-signing, and you've still got Minka there. I could see the Steelers turning to that a good deal this season if all 3 of those guys are healthy. I could see it being something that, they kind of employ. So all stuff to keep our eye on. And yeah, I mean, dude, training camp is here, man. And now we really start to get the storylines, and we're going to be right back into the thick of things regarding the NFL and both the Eagles and Steelers.
Oh yeah, man. I'm excited, man. We're getting right back into it. We're almost there. We're days. How many days? I don't even know. It's like less than 40.
I think the 25th is the Eagles. I think the Eagles are the 25th, and the Steelers are maybe the 27th. I don't remember for sure.
26th.
Yeah.
So really
it's it's here, man. You have any final thoughts on this last episode before we close things out?
No, I mean, I feel like I gotta say, go Birds, because that's usually how it ends. But yeah, that's all I'll say.
There we go. All right, man. Well, until we talk again, that has been it for this episode, dude. Good to be back on the podcast with you, bro. Let's go.
Oh, it feels great, man. I'm
all
excited.
Right, man. Well, you have a good rest of your day. I'm sure we'll be back here. Not looking like this next week, but we'll be back sometime in a week and a half, 2 weeks. And hopefully we'll have some training camp storylines to talk about. So you take it easy, man. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in and watching whenever you see this. Peace out. Catch you guys later.